And also there was an acrylic that was added to make the bricks dry a little slower sometimes, so they wouldn't crack. But basically, they were pretty much the same as the brick block the Indians made.
How were the arches opened, the archways in the center of the church?
Yeah, the arcade is one of the most beautiful parts of this mission, being a three-aisle mission. I think everybody that worked here really was anxious to get the main aisle opened up to the side aisles after we had built them. And it was a job that needed to be approached with some caution because the south side of the arcade has a pretty good bulge in it, which you can still see. Must have been, we felt, further away from the fault line, you get more shock wave. The shock wave gets larger. The north side didn't, the arcade stayed pretty straight, but the south side must have wobbled a little more because of the force of the quake being a little greater in the 60 feet or whatever it is. So yeah, it was something we had to really think about before we tore into those arches. One of the things we did was take the roof tiles off. That's when we took them off. I remember that. We took them off when we started those arches because of the weight and the fear that a quake could still knock the mission down, even though we had already reinforced the outside 2 aisles on the side.
Did you treat the arcade in any particular way? You talked about these bonder beams and so forth.
Yeah, the arcade, being that it was made out of
It's a loud one.
yeah, the arcade in the main aisle of the mission was made of the burnt tile type brick block rather than adobe. Then adobes were placed on top of that once they had finished the arches with the tile and then got a good base for adobe. They went ahead and placed adobe on top of it. So it was kind of, we weren't sure, okay, how badly damaged are the tiles in these, whatever, 4x4 columns, which are 14 feet high or whatever. So we had actually some engineers come and look at once we had cut all this concrete off, like I say, in the 30s they got all this free concrete from the Ideal Cement plant, donated to them, say, okay, here, try and reinforce this mission so it won't fall down. Well, like I say, it didn't really reinforce anything. It was hanging on them. So they were helping hold it up because there was no foundation under them. And when we did get a quake, who knows what was going on. So we were, it took us over a month to get rid of all the we had to cut it off with concrete wall saws and break it up into pieces and get rid of it. And once we got to look at the columns themselves, we had an engineer come in and he looked at it and he said, you know what, the best thing to do here would be to epoxy them back together, glue them back together with this little epoxy. So we pumped epoxy into all the cracks that were visible anywhere. And some of them took 20 or 30 gallons of epoxy. So you know there was voids in there. Some of them may be caused by quakes, some of them caused by poor workmanship or just holes, voids. So anyhow, after we'd gotten those to where we felt like we really had some solid columns to hold these arches, we went ahead and tore out most of the adobe out of them.
And as you were opening the archways, did you encounter any paintings, anything of that nature?
Yes. Some of the original, when the arcades were opened, the adobe was taken out of where they had filled the void of them to try to reinforce the mission at the time in those days. Early days of 1812, actually, after the quakes. We did come across some of the original painting that was on the walls of the mission. And coincidentally, we had the painters already in there starting to do some of the painting on the north and south ends of where we had already built the new walls. And they were searching for what kind of paintings to put on these walls. How did the Indians paint these walls? So this was great because we opened up a new way to make a better restoration of it. because we saw some of the original painting.
And what was that like for you to see those original?
Oh, it was a great feeling to know that this had been covered up. You know, it's just like finding a painting under a painting, you might say. Yeah, so it was great. I felt so much better about saying, hey, you know what, this is going to look right now. It's going to look the way it was originally meant to look.
Finally, were there any special techniques used to enhance the authenticity of the side aisles? I noticed the beams, are those original, things of that nature?
Yeah, when we first started to do any of the wood and the joisting and the roofing, we started looking at the old ones. And we saw the way they did their corbels and hand-hewed a lot of it with axe-type adze. So we did that. We bought regular surfaced lumber and hewed it with an adze to make it look like it was up there. And did some work with chainsaws, much the way they did with carving tools, but we got it done quicker that way. And so, yeah, we did. We tried to go. We tried to make it look as much like it probably would have looked back in 1812 if it ever got finished.
So typically for a single beam, about how long did it take to
adze? I'll tell you, when you first started using one of those adze, the thing you want to do is not chop your toes off, you know, because you had to keep them razor sharp, and yet you had to use pretty good force to get the wood to actually chip. So I would say a 12-foot beam, 4x4 or 6x6, would probably take a guy about an hour to really do a good job on it. And he'd have to be pretty good too. After a while, we got pretty good with it.
I hear this rumor that there were chains used on those old beams, that the men would come in and begin whipping those beams. Is that true?
Well, you know, I didn't hear that, but it could be true. That they could have used chains to hold things up too and made marks on them with chains, and thought that that was a good way to scar the beam or what have you. These lintels and the original lintels that are redwood and the original rafters and joists were all probably taken from the Santa Cruz Mountains area, because as far as we know, there weren't any real local redwoods. So they had to carry these a long ways. So who knows what happened to that lumber before it got here, you know what I mean?
Do you have any idea, or was there any speculation about how the lumber was actually brought in from Santa Cruz?
Yeah, I think, you know, some of the old guys, the old timers here in town, were trying to fathom what it would have been like to build this mission, being that this was a swampy area below us, mostly willows and, of course, the oaks around us, were the native trees, olives, and so on. But I doubt very much if there were a lot of redwood trees, or we'd still see them today. People protect those things nowadays. You know, you're not allowed to really do that, rape a forest anymore. So I really think that most of it was probably done by cart and burro and donkey and manpower. That's all there was to it.
Finally, you know, in retrospect, it's been, you know, well over 20 years since this project took place. What are your feelings about the project and what you accomplished here?
I think that everyone that worked on the restoration got a great feeling of accomplishment from what they did. I think that it was a job that was a once-in-a-lifetime job. I think we started to realize that right when we first started, you know, sweating a lot, but realizing we were doing something of emphasis. It'll have an impact on history. So my feelings personally are, my parents were part of this parish, my whole family growing up here. It was really something that I'll never get a chance to do again, so it was really a great feeling for me to work here.
Excellent.
You've got 3 minutes left on that tape.
Okay.
Cool.
I got to go to